So I listened to not all of the one you did with your dad, but some of it. It was very good. It was interesting to hear, like, because you're quite different in some ways, but it's also interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose he's it just feels like he had a very different kind of upbringing, I guess. Like just this idea of like the work ethic and how important that is. Like, I'm not saying you don't have a good work ethic. It's more just like, what seems to drive you, at least to me, is not that feeling that like I need to be a hard worker or something. Like, I know you do work really hard. I mean, you're putting out like a crazy number of podcasts, but like feels like more of a need for self like exploration or expression rather than something like, needing to like get that kind of financial security or I'm not exactly sure if he's super, I mean, like for him, it's almost like, yeah, cause even with the paper route and I don't want to like psychoanalyze him, but at the same time, it seems like he's quite driven by that feeling. I don't know, just money, basically. Do you think that's true? Or
but that's the whole question of the podcast.
Yeah.
Were you motivated by money? And the answer's no, because I got so lost in that. But I now know what I was chasing, which is so classic. It's like I didn't feel good enough.
Right.
So it's like, how do I prove that I am good enough?
Yes.
What labels can I associate? So
as in you, not
me,
him.
me.
Yeah.
So I was like, investment banking. If I work at a bulge bracket bank and I can say, this is me, so then it's like, I'm good enough. It's like, am I good enough now?
And do you think that's what's driving him, or
no, not at all?
Because he seems to care more about money. Is that right or wrong?
No. He doesn't care about. No. So he has been looked at me doing all these things, like going to camp, being obsessed with labels and what are these people doing and what's this, and I want to achieve this and and he's like, why do you? He said something to me, because this is this thing I ask people for feedback of like, what do you think where can I improve in my life? Like, what are anyway, one of the things he said was, you are taken by baubles.
Okay, right, interesting.
Which I'd never heard that phrase. Have you heard that? Have you heard that phrase?
Bauble is like a shiny thing, or so
that
is
you
it
put
like
on a Christmas tree.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. So he's like, why did you... And we talked about this in our last episode with the university rankings. Like, I was obsessed. It's like, I have to go Ivy League. That's a label that I want to associate myself with. Like, he's like, why are you so... I just say things like, I want to be in the House of Lords.
Right, okay,
He's just like, why?
Why?
And because it's an insecurity thing that it's like, I instead of following my own path, it's like I need to try and you see this all the time, people who reach the top of their game and they're like, am I good enough now, Dad, that I've won? Mine's not to do with my dad, but that I've won this gold medal, and then they're still not. It still doesn't fill that hole. So then they end up, and I can't wait to have some of these conversations with people who have reached whatever thing that they thought would fill this void.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have that.
Right.
It's like he's so focused on his, but yeah, it is.
But he is driven, and it seems like, I don't know if it's like a need for safety, like, he really, it seems like he attaches to this idea of like the work ethic, like he thinks it's important to work hard and like provide for yourself, right? Like in like, do you agree with that?
So that's a political value. That's like on a spectrum of, should the government be taking care of me, or should I be taking care of myself?
Yes.
It's full individual responsibility.
Right.
We are out there, it's that.
Yes.
It's on that spectrum. And that's what I really encourage people. People get so with politics, it so becomes, of course, about what country they live in, but, you know, and populism and this and blah, blah, what their friends are doing. But it's like, these surveys, have you ever done one like Political Compass?
I think so, but not for many years, yeah.
So you look at like, because it's not just left, right, it's authoritarian versus libertarian.
Yeah.
And so if you go through these set of...
I think.
If you go through these set of...
If that doesn't put you off.
No, what I realized is I'm pro-democracy. I am pro that me and you can sit down together and not kill each other whilst we might have... Do you know what I mean? Like, there are countries where you can't have a different sexual preference, or you can't have a different... whatever in...
I'm just hearing something back there, so I'm going to close this.
But that's really what I want for the world and for this podcast. And this is what I've thought about. Oh my God, this is so interesting. We can just say so much about this. But I realized this with, which I feel like this is a good time to say, because I always bring up Joe Rogan when I talk about this. And because what I'm saying, so if you've just said that you've never really listened to him.
No.
So here's a perfect example for me to explain. So what he does is he has long form conversations that are unedited, like literally like this. We just started recording, like we don't, well, obviously I don't know exactly what goes on, but as you listen to it, it's unedited. They're just doing exactly what you did, like, oh, got to run to the, because some of them go for 3 hours and it's like, oh, I'm going to the toilet or whatever.
Yeah.
And he asks the stupid question, like it's just curiosity, and he will really ask the questions. And then that's what makes it for such good listening, because other people want to know this, but it's very scary to admit that you don't know stuff, whatever. But so I'm like, oh my God, I love it that it's like this long form, like very like honest, like candid. And the way he started, so I've gone back and looked at 12 years ago, how did he start? And I love it because I'm like, oh, Bryan's on again. And it's like, yeah, because when he started, it's like the same, like his comedian friends or whatever. And they're just talking, and it's like, it's just like this rubber. It's so different to what it is now.
Right.
But it's still out there. So it's like,
you can still listen to those early episodes.
Yeah. And so that's what I use as my guiding thing, because I'm like, okay, he started like, it's like really imperfect, but it's just out there.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean to say, so when I'm like, Joe Rogan, whatever, some people, so this is so interesting. So some people like have this strong reaction. So an American guy who you met as well, he was like, oh, okay, so like middle America, super religious, racist, gun loving, rah. And I was like, whoa, like I didn't,
that's not how I think of him.
Yeah, because, and then I'm like, oh, because I'm not in the US and I'm not in this political, and now I'm really rejecting that in all aspects of life. I don't want this thing of like associate, like this person is this party and that means
yes.
It's so
I agree,
black and white.
Like this kind of categorical thinking where you say, like because like I have this idea that they belong in this category and therefore I know all these other things about them or something like that. Is that it? Or
yeah, that's exactly it. So I feel like by me saying Joe Rogan, that then some people are like, oh, so she's like agrees with using racist language or something, which is like absolutely not like just because. And then I think that, I mean, but it's like if you're playing Michael Jackson's music, is that like, oh, you support pedophilia or something? It's like,
or if you like Kant, are you a racist? He was very racist.
Was he?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, and then that's all, they're like tearing down the statues, like, oh, this, like, blah, blah, blah. But I realized as well with someone else that, oh yeah, so the Joe Rogan thing, by the way, so interesting, because I said that to one of my friends, because they're like, oh, what's the podcast? And it's just easy to be like, oh, everyone knows, most people know him, so
it's hard
and
to
his
describe
style,
anyway.
so
yeah.
But it's just me being lazy of like, but then I realized when people, anyway, fine. But someone was like, you should not be listening to that kind of stuff. And then I guess...
That's quite judgmental, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm also like, I don't really believe in telling other people what they should and shouldn't listen to or read.
Yeah,
like, I don't like the word should, because, anyway, that's like a whole thing in psychology as well. Because when you say that to yourself, I shouldn't eat this, it's like you're punishing yourself, and it's not nice to treat yourself like that.
Yeah, anyway. I've had this discussion with friends before, because when I say should, I'm often like, oh, I should, do this thing. Like to me, it doesn't feel like a kind of, it doesn't feel as heavy as it seems to feel for other of my friends, where like, it's like a judgmental thing. Whereas I'm like, oh, I should message this person, or, like, oh, I should try out this other new thing. You know what I mean? But I think for other people, it becomes this kind of judgment or something like that. And I don't feel like I have that to the same degree. So I have found it annoying with a few particular friends who are like, don't say should. And I'm like, I mean, like, can't I just say what I want? Like,
well, that comes back to my thing of not telling people what they should and shouldn't do, because they're saying you shouldn't say should. Because, but then that's an example of it. Because if I say to you, you shouldn't read a book by this person.
Yes.
You wouldn't like that.
No, I wouldn't like that, no. And I wouldn't like it if you told me I shouldn't listen to Joe Rogan, or I shouldn't, like, it's just like I have, as I told you before, I have like not really listened to him, but like I've heard, some criticisms about him. And so then if people... with
COVID or the...
Actually, no. Yeah, there's some of that. And then some... Are we live?
Yeah. This whole thing is great. I want to use all of it. I hope my dad doesn't mind us talking about him. But...
Oh, now I feel very self-conscious about anything I said about your dad.
No, don't worry.
But just about his intelligence, basically.
What about
I'll just say that some people have said to me that they don't find him that intelligent, and so then,
oh, Joe Rogan.
Yes,
or my dad.
Not your dad. Your dad seems very intelligent.
But that's the beauty. But that's the beauty of it, right? And that's given me permission. Because I had this whole thing like, oh, I'm not clever enough, and I can't do this until I've read every single book.
Right.
And it's like, well, then you're never going to. And people say that is a tendency that women have, more this over preparing.
I have that a little bit too, actually. But yeah.
So that's actually what's motivated me. And Izzy talked about in her podcast, I didn't say it there, that she wanted to do mechatronics because there are no women, and it's like this thing, and I really have that and have had that through my life.
And interesting that there aren't enough female podcasters.
No, there's female podcasters, but not, and maybe I'm wrong and people can tell me, but when I look at the the podcasters who go out and say, I don't really know what I'm doing, this isn't but I'm releasing episodes, I'm talking to people, I'm having interesting conversations, I might not be that smart, I'm not an expert, but I want to learn, and I'm not editing it. I see, Joe Rogan and Chris Williamson's another guy who's in this space, who's like learning out loud. And I've also looked back to follow him, like, what's the first episode? And then this thing that it's not perfect and it just evolves.
Yeah.
I don't see many women doing that, and I'm like, why do women's have to be so prepared? And not only women, like men do this as well. Like one of our friends told us about how he was cut out, like, perfectionist about the audio quality, like cut out every time he said so it's not only women that do this, but I just saw, okay, why is it that there doesn't seem to be any women who are saying, I'm just going to put something out there that's not super, like, I've done all the research, I'm talking to Bryan, I've spent like 4 hours researching his life to come prepared with questions, and I'm going to edit out all these bits where it's awkward and where I say and where you have to close the door. I'm like, no, why should I? If there are other men doing, like, that's the motivator for me.
Okay.
That I'm like, these guys are doing that. And that's the motivator that I'm like, he's just this WWE comedian, whatever, you know, but he's like, how cool is that he is talking to any of, like, the most interesting authors, like, academics. He has, you know, like, Elon Musk went on that, Bernie Sanders, like, people from all sides, and then, yeah, I think he got a bit obsessed with COVID and that. But it's like, I want to do that. Like, who cares what?
Yeah.
And now that's an insecurity thing. But now it's like, okay, I have a master's from Cambridge. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but who cares? Like, why do I need to be the smartest person in the world? No, you
don't. And like, to be clear, like, for me, it's more just like, it's as simple as, like, some people I know don't like him, and that judgment, but, like, from that, it's not like I wouldn't listen to him, and it's not like I would tell you shouldn't listen to him. Like, I would definitely want to have my own opinion and, like, think about it. And even if I totally didn't like him or something and knew him well, then I would ask you, like, oh, what do you like about him? Rather than being like, you shouldn't. It just seems like, you know, this shouldn't. I agree that, I mean, for me personally in my own life, like, I'm fine with me saying, oh, I should start a poetry WhatsApp or something, which I did, you know, or like, and in my mind, it starts as a should, like, oh, this would be a cool thing to do, you know, like, or we should record a podcast this Saturday, you know, like that kind of thing. And it doesn't feel like kind of judgmental, but when I totally agree that when it's like between people, like, oh, you should not, you know, talk about this, or you should not listen to that, then yeah, I don't like that kind of should. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And
that, so then what happened, which is interesting, another friend of mine, one of my really good friends, I told him, because I'm like, he listens to a lot of Joe Rogan, and he's a big lefty. Like, right? So for me, I told him what had happened with this other friend, which is, like, completely fine. This stuff happens all the time, that people, anyway, you know, people, it's like, oh, why are you reading the Telegraph or something, you know? But
yeah, I don't really like any of that. Like, it just, I don't know, like, I feel like go in and make your own judgment of things, and, like, don't adhere to categories. There's, like, even people that in my head are people that I'm pretty sure represent the exact opposite of everything that I believe, and I have intentions to go in and read their books to, like, find out what I think about what they're saying, and, like, what, you know, what it's like within that argument, you know what I mean? So, and I don't, like, I just think that's an important thing to do. Like, I actually think it's important to kind of challenge your own beliefs or categories through experience, right? Like, and if you're just judging a book by its cover or something, then you don't get that experience, right? Like, if you told me you should listen to this Joe Rogan podcast, I would 100% listen to it. I would never be like, oh, well, I heard he's like this or that, you know what I mean? Or anything like that, like, you know. But I guess what I do respect is, like, you know, the opinions of people who have, like, given me good recommendations in the past, you know what I mean? So, like, as in, if it's just someone I completely randomly met and I know nothing about them, and they're like, you must watch this movie, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, maybe. Like, and maybe I would, you know, I'm not saying I wouldn't. But if it's, like, a friend that has given me really, really good recommendations in the past, then I would take it more seriously. So I think there is that element. I don't know. How do you feel about?
Yeah. So what happened with, wait, I'll come back to that. Sorry. What happened with this friend was, he was so upset. As in, so
about the Joe Rogan thing.
Another friend. So her thing of telling me not to listen to him was the same thing of, like, that's, like, extreme right wing, like,
wow.
That's the idea, right? Like, that's, like, Fox News. That's, like, Donald Trump. You know, it's the category thing. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're saying Joe Rogan's name. That's the same as saying that you're an anti-vaxxer who's racist, who, you know, that's the idea. Like, none of this is said, this is the subconscious thing, and that's my interpretation. And so when I said it to him, and he is, like, opposite of that, right? And he gets upset. Someone said, on the first podcast we did, we said, I don't know, we mentioned Joe Rogan, and then another friend of mine messaged him like, and we mentioned John Peterson, and they were like, you mentioned like 2 extreme right-wing people, and he was like, Joe Rogan wants to legalize heroin, like how is that?
Yeah.
But so he was so upset that someone had said, because he was like, they don't even know him, like these people, like they haven't even listened to him, but they're saying anyway. But then for me, this all comes back to the like mainstream media, or like outrage media. I don't want to say mainstream, because mainstream, like the Financial Times is mainstream, right? But they're not publishing this outrage.
Yes. Yeah.
All like as much as some new, and so that's what it's like. This device, basically, this whole podcast is to like break down that divides of this type of person does X, Y, and Z things.
Yes.
Therefore, it's the categories. It's like you can't. And so for this podcast, another person who we both know, I was thinking, oh my God, this guy is so interesting. Like, I'd love to have him on. He's totally deep. He's like massive lefty, whatever. Great. I was like, so interesting. And then I was like, I don't know much about this person. I bet he has some like weird, like, I was just like, I bet there's some weird, like, sex stuff, like weird relationship, like, because I can't, because sometimes I just get a sense of like, no, don't. But sometimes I just get a sense of like, I really want to talk. I didn't even know that you had that views, but it's something like that. I sense that you're an open-minded person, that even though we don't have the same views on or the same, it's like, where do those values even come from? Who even knows? But we have the same value that we can have a conversation and we're allowed to read books and we're not going to burn them.
Yes.
And
mine have switched many times over the years, so I'm old enough for that to have happened, I feel like. Yeah.
But so then I was like, okay, I can't, if I'm going off the sense, for example, another one is a guy was fixing something with my roof, and we started talking about this depression, and I don't know, within like 5 minutes, and he told me about his friend who'd had a drug problem and talks openly about suicide. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy, just messaged this guy on Instagram, like, will you come on my podcast? I know nothing about this guy. This guy, and I don't, like, that's not my job with this podcast, to fully vet. Like, if how do I know if what you did 20 years ago? But I'm not taking responsibility for your action by me having this conversation with you. And because I even hear, there's like, I was watching this documentary that had about trauma. Gabor Mate, do you know him? Yes. He's so cool. But they're like talking about...
He's in London in the next few weeks, I think.
Oh my God. Can we meet him?
He's giving a talk, I think. Yeah, anyway, we can talk about that later, but yeah.
So they're in prison, and they're talking about... There's a scene of them in prison talking about, wow, what happened to them in their childhood, and that they, there are people who... A guy's murdered someone, and he's done all this healing work, and it's like, obviously you've murdered someone, that's this thing that he has to live with, and he's in prison for the rest of his life, but he's doing this healing work. And it's like, that would be such a cool conversation to learn from that guy and have him to talk. It was so amazing watching it. But it's like, by me talking to that guy, does that mean I support murder? Like, obviously not.
Yeah.
And
so Mate had a conversation with him, or because he has a podcast, right?
No, it's this documentary called The Wisdom of Trauma.
Okay.
That I heard him on a podcast and he mentioned it, and it's one of those things that you like donate. If anyone's interested in watching it, you just go to wisdomoftrauma.com. And then it's like you can donate to watch it or something. But it's really, because I really love finding this stuff to watch about, like, spirituality. There's so many podcasts and books, but it's like, where else can you go where people are like, I've suffered with this addiction or like depression, and some inspirational type thing. And it's because, a lot of TV and stuff, what are we even talking about? Anyway, but a lot of TV and stuff is like really dark and not good for the soul. Or it's not enlightened, which is what we were going to be talking about.
Yeah, we were going to talk about enlightenment. So one thing I wanted to say about the categories, because that's something I'm super interested in, is like, what is the creation of these categories? What effects do categories have on the brain and stuff? That Jessica Nordell book, The End of Bias, talks about this, like, in children, which is you can just make up categories like blue and yellow in a classroom, and then you sort the kids randomly, and if you refer to them, then they'll start essentializing the categories and say, well, obviously the yellows are smarter than the blues, even though it was completely random. You know what I mean? Like they start to attach meaning to it, so it has these effects on your brain, even if those categories are totally random, you know? And I've been thinking a lot about it. Actually, the thing that I've been thinking about this week is, what I don't like is opinions. So I have an opinion about opinions. Basically, I just, for myself, let's say, I don't like having opinions about abstract categories. So like having an opinion about something specific is kind of okay, but it's like having an opinion about a category, it's just like already becomes a mess, because like what's in that category, like who created it, do we both agree what even is in that category? You know, like the more abstract the term becomes, I always use the example of capitalism. It's like, what even do you mean? You know, often people don't mean the same thing when they say that word. Same thing with democracy, same thing. They're like any of these really abstract
patriarchy
terms.
As well.
Patriarchy, probably. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Feminism. What do you mean by feminism? There's like a bunch of different, it has this like long history, or there's ones that are much older than that. Truth is one of the ones that I'm working on. Logic, like those are terms that everyone thinks they know what they mean, but if you actually use them in a conversation and then you ask them what do they mean by it, often they give different definitions. And so it's like, you know, to have a strong opinion one way or the other on these abstract categories, it seems like a problem. Whereas like something like, oh, listen to this podcast because I thought it was good, or, you know, like this restaurant is good, or whatever, you know, like that, I'm fine with having an opinion. And in fact, I have strong opinions on those kind of things. But having a strong opinion on like the market or something, it's like, it's so abstract that I don't think people mean, you know what I mean? Like everyone's experience of it is different, and what they even mean by it is different, I think, you know?
But people will project the thing. So the thing with podcasts,
yeah.
If I sent saying, I think this is like, listen to this podcast, it's so interesting. You know, it's like, for example, one of the most interesting, coming back to Joe Rogan, is episodes, is this woman who escaped from North Korea, and it's like talking about her story.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's so interesting, right? So, but to send that, it's clearly like you're sending it because it's like, oh, here's a very interesting story about North Korea and about this woman's life. But people, just the name, like the categories are so strong that people have categorized. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh my God, this is an offensive name
instant
to me.
reaction to it.
Yeah. Or saying, this happens with my newsletter all the time when I'm like, oh, I was so scared to say a passage out of Jordan Peterson's book about, that really helped me and continues to help me, that it's like, when you just have this pile of paperwork staring at you, and it's like this stuff has built up over years of stuff that you just haven't faced, and it's just this chaos in your environment. And it's like, can you like talk to yourself? And you've read the book, do you remember this bit?
This is 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah,
I have read it. I don't remember this, I don't think.
So it's like you make a deal with yourself, and you're like, can you give me 5 minutes? Like, let's sit with it for 5 minutes. That's it, 5 minutes. And then I will go and get a coffee together. Yes. And it's like talking to yourself in that way, and not being like, oh, this is so pathetic. Like, and not, you can't do 5 minutes and then be like, oh, well, I'm going to do more. It's like, no, you made this deal with yourself and you honor that deal. And that genuinely has helped me so much. And I feel like helps, and I continue to use that through my life, and I think that will potentially help a lot of other people, so I want to share that. But it's like, I was so scared that by mentioning his name, but it's not, it's like with Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm just too sensitive, because I'm like, oh my God, I know that some people don't like Gwyneth Paltrow. So the first time I mentioned her in my thing in my newsletter. It was like, I had to say something like, shoot me, like I like guilty or whatever. Like I'm a GP fan.
To like caveat
but it's like,
it.
But it's like if you like, it's like a preference. You know, it's like if you like vanilla ice cream, you don't have to be like, oh my god, so sorry to offend someone who.
Yeah, I'm having this issue with Heidegger, who's like a German philosopher who was basically a Nazi, and so it's like everyone always has to kind of say this, that he has this sort of problematic, you know, and actually there's other people that I mean, he's writing in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and so...
And did he fight with the Nazis?
No, he was just... I actually don't know the exact details, but he definitely was sort of aligned with them, and it's like...
Philosophically.
Yeah, and was in Germany, and yeah, so... But he has some ideas that are just really useful, but you always end up doing this thing.
Like what?
Oh, did you see any of the videos I did recently, the philosophy ones, or...
Which ones?
I've done too many. The one I did recently on... It was called Philosophy as Methodology. It was a few weeks ago.
Where are you posting these?
YouTube.
Okay. When you send me stuff...
Yes.
Yeah, I'm bad at this stuff.
No, don't worry.
Then I watch it. So if you've sent it to me...
I don't think I have, actually, so I will send it to you. I was very nervous about it.
I'm not like a person who uses YouTube.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's okay. So in that one I'm talking about, he has this idea of... that objects can either be ready to hand or present at hand. And the idea is that, like, you just picked up the water and that object is ready to hand, in the sense that it contains water, you want the water, so you just pick it up, and it's like pretty much, it's like transparent, it's like unconscious, it's like almost like an expression of your will. Whereas if you were like, if I were to say like, what do you think of the color of that water bottle, then it changes the quality, the kind of element of focus, you know what I mean, rather than being this ready to hand, like a tool that you can just use and express your will through, then it becomes like an object in itself that you're looking at, you know what I mean? So like, I think the classic examples are like a light switch, which is like when you come in the room, you flip the switch and the light comes on and you don't think about the switch at all. But if the light doesn't come on, then you're like, oh, the switch didn't work, you know what I mean? And so it's like flips you into this other mode where you're like suddenly highly conscious of the switch as a switch, whereas normally when you walk into the room, there's just zero thought on the switch, right?
So he talks about these ideas.
Yeah, so that's one of his ideas that I'm talking about. But anyway, he's someone that people always need to caveat. And
how do you caveat it? Like, yes, I know he was a Nazi.
He was a Nazi, but yeah, exactly. And there are problematic. I mean, now I just feel like I'm going to out all the Nazis that.
Have they already been outed?
Yeah, they've already been outed. I mean, some have been outed more than others.
Or are you part of some secret Nazi?
No, and I'm not in any way sympathetic to the Nazis, but it's like, okay, the other two guys, one I think is very famously known as a Nazi, and the other is not. And one is Louis Ferdinand Céline, he's a French novelist. He writes about he writes about the First World War, and he's got this. It's an absolutely incredible book. It might be the best novel of the 20th century. It's like
really?
Insane. Yeah. And
what's
it's called Voyage au bout de la nuit, or Journey to the End of the Night. And it's a novel, but it's like super autobiographical, and it's just about him. And so anyway, he's a very problematic figure because he becomes, in Vichy France, he becomes aligned, or he writes all these anti-Semitic tracts.
Wow. Okay. So because that's what I was going to ask. Like, does he fundamentally, because there are so many different levels. Like, it could be some kind of cowardly thing, like, or survival thing. In Auschwitz, it's like people who have, Jewish doctors who would then have these different positions, and then they feel all this guilt.
Yes.
Oh
and
my
the
God.
capos, yeah.
I
It's
just read this
horrible, yeah.
amazing book about someone who he was working for the chemical factory that made the gas
Cyclone
from
B.
and it's like such a complicated thing because he's trying to survive, because
Yes.
what are you meant to do? Not
I
do
think
it.
the
And
inventor of that, wasn't that what's his name? Haber, of the Haber-Bosch process. I think he was Jewish, one of the guys who developed Cyclone B. And he also, but it's like this complicated thing because he also discovered the process of artificial nitrogen fixation, which like both is used in explosives, and it's also like where all fertilizer comes from. So it's like there's like 6 billion people that just couldn't even be alive if it weren't for this thing. But at the same time, it was like that was used for, explosives basically, which were, like this Second World War would never have been as deadly as it was without this process. So there's all kinds of like complicated things like that.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a difference between that, someone doing something for survival, or the women who slept with German men because for their safety, like they had to allow themselves be raped by these men or whatever, versus someone who's like I
Celine.
genuinely believe that the Jewish race should be exterminated.
Yeah,
so is that guy in that camp?
The anti-Semitic it's one of those things where you always hear about it and then you're like, I read some of them just to be like, how bad are they? And they're really bad, basically.
Wait, what he writes?
He wrote, I think, like 7 anti-Semitic tracts in like the 30s or 40s, and like you always hear that Celine had this problematic history, but he's French, and like I don't think it's like a defense, but he has a pretty bad time in the First World War. Like he's released from duty, like he's basically seen as like insane and discharged by the French army. But this is like a crazy thing to happen because the French army was still doing the like Roman, I think it's like called decimation or something like that, where like for cowardice, the Kubrick film Paths of Glory from the 50s is about this, which is like for cowardice they were just killing every 10th person. And so like in order for you to get discharged by the French army during the First World War for being too crazy, it's like they must have been like, wow, this guy really needs help, because they were still executing people for cowardice in the First World War.
Wow.
So Celine was like very messed up. Like there's no question that he was very messed up, but it is like this kind of there's a lot we can think of much more recent people who have got these problematic things of they did some incredible work and they also have these terrible sides to their personality.
Well, that's even people use that. Okay, I don't know why this came into my head, but like people say that with Martin Luther King Jr. cheated on his wife, and but it's like, what? It's like, yeah, we're all human. Like we all make mistakes and do things we're not. Obviously, there's different levels, and then that's why, I mean, this is a whole area I know nothing about, but like that's why we have like the justice system, and if you do murder someone, you go. But then that's why it's so interesting now in this culture with the cancel culture thing, whether that's real or not, but the fact that with social media that you can just be deleted. So it's not even like, because if you murder someone, you're not deleted, you're sent somewhere for a sentence that's like all decided. Whereas with social media, it's just like, oh, someone's decided to delete this account because of whatever, and people feel so passionately about this with Trump. I mean, so I can imagine people just switching this off, being like, but Trump should be never like, but it's like, where did these rules come from? Like, there's no, because even with the after the war with the there's the
denazification
the Nuremberg trials, right? So it's like that. It's not just like, oh my god, the Nazis, obviously, but it's like there's a proper process. And now it's like,
but most people weren't subject to it. It was really just the kind of highest level that kind of got most of that. The if you're interested in that topic, there's a fantastic documentary called Shoah about the death camps. It's like 10 hours long, but it's amazing, and it's basically only people who, because at that time, both in France and Germany, at the time that that film was made in the mid 70s, maybe early 70s, it was like super easy to just find people who had worked in the death camps and were just living their lives basically. And so the director Claude Lanzmann just goes around interviewing these guys, and they're like they're crazy because most people weren't tried, you know, including ones that worked in these, not in the, I mean, of course the ones that worked in the concentration camps, you know, many of them went free, but also there are 4, maybe there's more, I could be wrong about this, but there's some camps that were only for killing basically. So Treblinka and I think Chelmno or something like that. And so people that worked at those were also around, and most of them were not tried. So, but
wow, and they're interviewed in this documentary.
Yeah.
And is it like they're evil people, or they're people doing their job, or it's just a whole messed up thing?
It's complicated, is what I would say. I highly recommend it, especially if you're thinking about about interviewing ethics and things like that. It's a lot, but it's like, and it's a lot to recommend to someone, but I think it's a really important film. It's really important that it exists, and I think it's important to watch it. So, and also about just interviewing ethics, because sometimes they don't know they're being recorded. In other cases they do. So, yeah.
Interesting.
As I recall. It's probably been 10 years since I've seen it.
But so my thing now with this that idea of, oh my God, I might interview someone and then I find out, 20 years ago they raped someone or something, right? Someone said this to me, he's like, you have to imagine like you've interviewed someone and now you find out they're a pedophile. Right. And imagine how that feels. And I'm like,
why?
No, as in to get over that you can survive that. So it won't, that fear, like that could happen and that's fine. But for me, it's so weird, the fear. I
thought he was saying you shouldn't do interviews because what if they're a pedophile or something like that?
No, he's saying...
He's saying the opposite.
No, because it's impossible. Like, how am I supposed to know about every single thing that has ever happened in anyone's life? But my fear is less that. I'm fully... It's like, yeah, I'm not supporting me associating with someone, like, through a podcast does not mean I support like the decisions they're their own person.
Yeah.
But my fear is I get so because my fear is like abandonment of people in my life, like my friends and family suddenly not speaking to me,
right,
or something like that. It's like that's the irrational fear. So mine is like that's why I'm so sensitive on the Joe Rogan thing. But my thing is I get, even like last night I was talking about how I met this woman as a woman who's like a kind of female role model type person, but I was so scared to say that I'd met her because she has her political allegiance, whatever, is really like public. She worked for a prime minister.
Is it Marine Le Pen? No.
Okay, but it could be equivalent of like someone who's worked with Marine Le Pen, and I'm like, okay, or someone who's worked for Trump, and I'm like, I'm meeting this woman because she's like really similar in the Joe Rogan thing. Like she's inspiring to me because she's really brave and like has gone out and done this thing. I'm not meeting her because of her political views. Yes. I'm meeting her because of this, right? But I am so scared to... That's the thing I need to get over. But I guess that's the thing, if people... That would be so sad if one of my friends is like, I just will never speak to Delia again because she interviewed someone who voted for this political party.
Right.
It's like...
I can see how that's...
But I think that's like, I can't live... That's a people-pleasing thing. It's like, I'm being too sensitive about trying to manage everyone else's emotions. But it's like... yeah, it's just like well, my values is exactly what you're saying about we can read books and learn, and that's how you challenge your thinking as well. And if someone doesn't agree with that, that's fine. I respect that, because there are whole countries that don't agree with that. But it's like, I don't think that's the best way for humans to live, by burning books. Or...
Yes. I just think it's bad to have contempt prior to investigation. Just like, but that doesn't mean that you have to expose yourself to every, thing that you, but like, I do think it's important to stay open-minded, and I think what you're doing is important just in the sense of, having those conversations without regard to what you should or shouldn't be doing, or who you should or shouldn't be speaking to. I think it's important, and like, we should be having those kind of conversations, and maybe we'll get it wrong sometime, and maybe there'll be backlash, but hopefully, if it's important to be in good faith, right? And so if both people can come in good faith, then whatever comes out of that will hopefully be something positive. Whereas it feels like a lot of, I'm not really directly involved in a lot of the online stuff or whatever, but from the temperature I get from it, a lot of it is just bad faith, right? And every once in a while I have like a little bit of that kind of interaction on Twitter, but I think that mostly I'm dealing with philosophers who have been dead for a really long time, and so then like nobody's that worked up about them, although there are some, as we've talked about.
So what, someone might say, why are you discussing his work?
No, Heidegger people don't seem to often, like, I could tweet about Heidegger and it wouldn't be a problem, I think. In fact, I have, and I haven't gotten backlash from that. Maybe I'll get backlash from this conversation. Kant as well has quite racist views, as I said earlier.
What kind of racist views?
Well, he just thinks that, he kind of seems to think that non-Europeans aren't capable of things like philosophy. So basically just that their brains are not wired up, or that they're not intelligent enough, or something like that. And and often, again, the passages are quite bad if you read them, but I think most people don't read them. So I think it's important to read Celine and also read the anti-Semitic things and come to your own decision, like, about what you think about all of that. It's hard, but
Well, the Unabomber is another example.
Oh yeah,
right?
The Unabomber, yeah.
That we were talking about. Oh no. So I saw that on Twitter, someone did a thread of 10 things, the Unabomber is, so he's the guy who, he killed people with what?
Mail bombs, yeah.
So it says that, it's like, he's one of the most whatever. It says very clearly he did this bad stuff. But from his manifesto, he was also one of the whatever thinkers, and from his manifesto, here are 10 things, classic Twitter threads. And it was laid out in such a, I think they just really nailed it, that it's like, no one's endorsing this person's behavior, but he did write this manifesto, and he spent a lot of time thinking about why society is the way it is, and I've read it, and I guess that's...
Have you read it?
No,
okay.
This was me saying the person. I think I read, I started reading, I'm just like, I start reading things and I'm like, I want to talk about I told you this, and then I'm like, I've started so many books. I can recommend
reading it. It's called Industrial Society and Its Future, I think. It's often referred to as the Unabomber Manifesto, but it was like titled, and he had it published in the Times and I think the Washington Post or something like that. And I think it is an important piece to read, and it also does not encourage violence. It basically says, look, this the problems that are pointed out in this document, like, can't, like, everything's gonna get worse before it gets better. And so every person has to make their own decision about, like, what, and he does talk about the question of violence, but he doesn't actually encourage violence, even though he himself committed acts of violence. At the same time, it's coming out now, I think, or maybe this has been known for a while, but there's, you know, all these CIA documents have been declassified, and they experimented on him, actually. So I don't know whether it was part of the MK Ultra program or whatever, but they were giving him doses of, it's come out that the CIA was, like, testing out all kinds of mind control operations and giving people huge amounts of LSD. Yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't want to, like, lead people astray, but, like, all these things that we thought sounded like crazy conspiracy theories are, like, now coming out as, like, no, that was something that happened. And I think they experimented on Ted Kaczynski, and I think they also...
Who's the Unabomber?
The Unabomber, yes.
Where does it... Is it Unabomber?
It's Unabomber.
Where does that come from?
So it's... What is it? Universities and airlines or something like that, that he targeted? I don't know exactly, but... Yeah, I mean, the overall thing from... I'm trying to think if I can... we did talk about this, didn't we? Because we were talking about... We talked about the Unabomber manifesto.
You told me as part of this group. I was like, oh, what does this group that meets do? And you said we discuss stuff.
Yes.
And we discuss... and you were like, potentially controversial. I was like, stuff. I was like, oh, what's controversial?
Yeah, we did read the Unabomber manifesto. And I've actually since met someone who did his, like... I think it was a political philosophy degree, and he focused on the Unabomber recently. Did you talk to him? Or no?
No.
Okay.
Because, this guy, was he a professor at Harvard? Or he studied there?
I think he studied there, and then, yeah, he was a really smart guy. Yeah, and very messed up by the kind of torture they did to him, it seems like. And then I think his brother turned him in or something like that, because... Yeah, anyway, the manifesto came out in the papers. I think I mentioned this to you before, like, the overall argument is that, like, industrial society makes certain things too easy and other things, like, unattainable. And so it's like, he thinks in this kind of, like, view of the state of nature or whatever, which of course is in itself problematic, and, you know, people going back to Nietzsche and Rousseau and Hobbes all have their different understandings of what that might have been like, mainly on the basis of thought experiments, although by the time of Rousseau there was at least, I mean, even by the time of Hobbes, there was some contact with the New World, and that's probably what kicked a lot of this off, which is basically, there seems to be a lot of other people on Earth, and they all live very, very differently from how we do. And so what is, like, if our culture is doing something to us, then what is it doing? And so those are all the questions that come up over those kind of years following the discovery of the New World, the centuries, really. And where was I going with that? Yeah, Kaczynski's kind of view of that is that in the state of nature, like, most goals, like seeking food, you know, seeking shelter, seeking mates, were these things that were, like, complicated things, which, like, you had to put most of your energy and effort into those things that had, like, they were short-term goals, but they were meaningful, and they had this kind of, like, important quality of, like, they were difficult but attainable. And he thinks that in modernity, a lot of things that used to fall in those categories, like getting food, now it's, like, super easy to get food, right? Like, you basically just can go anywhere if you have money, and you just get the food, and there's no effort required at all. And other things, like working a job, which fall in, he divides it up into categories that are, like, things that are kind of difficult but attainable, things that are, like... So wait, I'm trying to remember exactly what it is. The final one is, like, things that just never finish, like maintenance tasks, like, you know, showering or something. It's not like you are like, okay, now I've showered and I don't need to ever do that again. You just kind of have to keep doing it. And he thinks that, like, basically, so the two earlier categories are things that are easy to achieve and attainable, and things that are like riskier or more difficult to achieve but attainable. And he thinks that basically modernity wipes out the second category, so everything falls into this category of it's a survival need but it's really easy to attain, or into this constant maintenance, like going to work thing where you just never finish, like, and all the things that are like risky and you might get it but you might not, and it's difficult and you have to strive for it, but then you get this kind of unreliable payoff, that category disappears entirely. Not that we don't have anything that does that, but everything that we now have that falls into that category is what he calls a surrogate activity, which means that we have to make it up. So basically getting really good at golf or something like that, there's no survival need tied to that, but it fills this kind of need to kind of strive and get good at something kind of hard. But because it's now detached from survival needs, it's just made up. So like, or getting 10,000 Twitter followers, or, you know, like it could be anything, right? Which is like these things that are essentially like games we make up to fill the fact that the actual survival needs are no longer difficult. Does it make sense?
Yeah. And that sounds
reasonable.
Like, but that's like, what's it called? Maslow's hierarchy. That it's,
yeah.
But this is why we can sit here and have this conversation.
Yes, because we're not starving.
Yeah. And we've met those basic needs. And that's what I would be so interested in doing in my life. Somehow I need to figure this out. But it's something to do with making sure every human in our society, that's why I'm interested in exploring like universal basic income. But I don't know if it works, because then it's like, anyway, but so everyone's needs are met.
Yeah.
And now, because we have enough resources for that, right? And now it's like, we're all on this playing field. Now go and follow your like purpose and what your deep like inner voice to do, whether it's like to paint or like to have conversations like these or to do whatever. But that you also have to do, there's something about doing work that we need that, because I've tried this to be like, I'm removing everything from my life and
right.
like, well, because I was too sick to be working, but then now I'm like, oh, work is good.
Yes.
It's not in a brainwashed way, but it's like, because that can get into a, you know, that's on the gates of Auschwitz. So it's not in that way work sets you free. It's not like that, but it's like, you don't, yeah, it's like,
God, we're really got rid of the whole Auschwitz thing this episode. I thought we were going to talk about Buddhism, and instead we're like going to get cancelled for talking about Nazis too much.
But this relates to that stuff. Oh my God, it's all like connected, but it's something, it is like, it doesn't feel good to do nothing and to not help other humans. And there's something, it's like, there's some kind of basic stuff that we need to do. Like, we're connected, we're social creatures, like we need other humans. I don't know. So it's something like realizing like, yes, our needs are met, survival ones, but how do we live
flourish,
fulfilled lives,
thrive,
thrive, and not about like, oh, keep producing and like blah blah blah, because why do we have that? We have some humans, we have this obsession to like keep building and keep I don't, you know, so many of with the climate, it's like oh, why don't we like we've fucked stuff up by like building too much with this resources, why don't we like build this solution with these other resources? It's like why don't we just like why don't we like scale it back and be like, why are we doing, you know, with electric vehicles or something? And now it's like all the copper and the mines, and it's like children being exploited, and it's like no one's questioning like, what do we need cars? Like maybe we do need cars, maybe we don't need, but it's, I don't know, it's like what am I even talking about? I don't know, but it's like it's like we are very fortunate here, and most of the world is being, you know, if you read Factfulness or something like that, you can see this isn't, people have this view that it's like half the world is still like starving. It's the poverty rate has gone, like obviously there's still, I think it's like 800 million people are below the poverty line, so it's like, though it's like still that until everyone's not living in poverty. But we can get to that point where, I don't know, but then it's also like how 8 billion people all, it's like hard to think about, because what are you meant to do about the people in North Korea?
And this is why I think it is important, you know, Stoicism has this idea about like dichotomy of control, where there's like a lot of things in the world, like whether the sun comes up tomorrow, that you just can't control, whereas there's other things like, do we record a podcast, that we can control, right? And they just think that in this dichotomy, like the more things you care about that are not in your control, like the less happy you'll be, basically. And so it's like thinking about how to intervene, not that you don't care about the wider issues, but that maybe, you know, and maybe you talk about them or write about them or something like that, but you kind of can't fix your happiness on them, on things that are completely out of your control. And at the same time, you don't really want that to like dissuade people, but it does feel like we're not on our own, right? We're deeply interconnected, but it feels to me like, at least my focus right now is on small groups and like collectives, or like community, or like, you know, the kind of like these creative nights, or other ways of like interacting with small communities, to actually think about, you know, what would a better world look like and how could we intervene as a group, rather, because I think as individuals it's very difficult. Like it's kind of hard to get anything done as an individual, as I'm finding. And I get what you're saying about work too, because I now have not worked a job for like 4 years, I think, and it's a lot. I spend a lot of time managing myself, like as in, you know, I have to build all my own routines. I have to like, you know, like build all these structures and all this kind of stuff just to see people and just to do that kind of stuff. And so I definitely think that there is something to be said for having a lot of that built in automatically, that you actually like are part of a team, or you are doing work, and a sense of shared purpose seems like incredibly important. And if you have to build all of that from scratch, it's like not easy. Like, and you do lose something from doing it on your own. Like a lot of people, I think, or like, I also think there's huge problems with the way that work was going, at least when I was working 4 or 5 years ago. It seems like actually COVID might have improved some things in terms of like people's balance and how much they work and how much they go into the office and things like that. I don't know.
I was listening to Esther Perel was on this Financial Times weekend podcast thing that I was listening to about this thing at work, which I feel, so when I realized I had all these thoughts, like first principles, what do you need, like okay, why do you need money? Like seriously, I went back to basics. Why do you need money? Okay, because this is the system we're in, like you need to pay for heating or you will literally die, and that's the means we do it, so you need to participate in that. And then it's like, okay, why with work, it's like, okay, there's lots of ways to get income, right? Which a lot of people will never come to that realization, but it's like, first point, there's lots of ways to make money. It doesn't need to be in a traditional job. But then it was like, okay, if money's figured out, it's like money's figured out, this and this and this, like following purpose, great. But then it's like, oh my God, I am missing, working in a team, being around human, it's like being around humans to just say, it's like, oh, what, you know, meaningless, dumb stuff that comes up in your head of like, oh, my cup of tea tasted, I don't know, some weird thought. It's like, you actually need, well, I don't know, I need an outlet for that stuff. And so it's stuff like having people around, but then also, the shared thing. And so now that I am doing work for something that's bigger than me, that's so much passion, this clean energy startup. And it's like so cool, because it's like, oh, this is like this solution and the people are so passionate, and it's like, I'm contributing, and then it's confident. It's also like, I'm adding value to here. I'm like helping other people. They're like, and then it's like, I'm being rewarded for this in the system that we live in, which is like, okay, how do we, you know, because we're not in a place where it's like, whatever, where you, okay, anyway, so, but it's like being around people. And now I'm working with the thing of my place of work and having a place to go, it's like, oh, actually, it's very important for me to leave where I live, because otherwise all that maintenance stuff, like when I do a load of washing, it's like, oh my God, is the point of life just doing washing over and over again and then you die? And it's like, we're just using resources to like wash our clothes. Why are we doing that? But then it's like, okay, don't do it. Like, wear disgusting clothes. Like, see, and then you realize, oh, we're social creatures and people don't want to like be near me if I do that. But so Esther Perel was saying, which I've noticed as well, it's like people aren't going to work in the same way. Since COVID, it's still this thing of like, oh, people are only working. And what I've realized, what I think it is for in this country, it's a lot of people who, more senior people who live further away with more space and whatever in the countryside or wherever, and it works for them to be not coming in. But for young people, it's like not. And so Esther Perel is really arguing this, and I've heard a lot of people arguing this. It's like, it is not good for you as a young person to be just at home, like in your pajamas, like doing this job.
Yeah.
There's so many other, the interactions you have where just, like I had this the other day at the playing tennis, and then I just got talking to this woman who then it turns out she's blah, blah, blah. All these little things happen where then it helps you move forward with career and what, like those tiny interactions. But Esther Perel's angle, so do you know who Esther Perel is?
Yes.
Yeah,
I've read 2 of her books.
I really want to read them. So
they're fantastic.
The FT introduced her as the most famous therapist, which I don't know if that, and they're like, and there's not many people who are famous in that field. I'm like, yeah, there are. I know tons of famous therapists. You're not reading the same books I'm reading. But yeah, so she's this kind of relationship. But so she talks about our expectations from relationships, that it's like romantic relationships, you put all the pressure on that they have to be stability, security, but they also have to bring passion, uncertainty, spontaneity. And it's like, how are you expecting all of this from one person?
From one person, yeah.
And she's saying that with the workplace, we're now expecting a job takes care of like all your needs, like your emotional needs, this. And you're not even going to turn up. You're going to sit at home in your pajamas and expect that your workplace is like...
Still provides social needs and
like your mental health and
and mental health. Yeah, exactly.
And like the right income and... Yeah, it's really interesting. But again, that's like... I feel like that was controversial to say. But Esther said it, so...
Yes.
Yes.
She's great. I mean, I read The State of Affairs and Mating in Captivity in that order, I think. Yeah, I think Mating in Captivity is the earlier book. But they're both really good. Yeah, highly recommended. Yeah, and then the other thing is, because I'm really interested in this question of flourishing or thriving, there's a Greek word, eudaimonia, which is like the old goal of sort of early philosophy, which was about, before it got like kind of abstract and, distant from people's lives, there was this idea that like philosophy was supposed to improve your life, and that by adopting a philosophy you would actually like have this kind of worldview, or like you would know how to live the good life, is the other way that eudaimonia is sometimes translated. And so I'm really interested in that question. The early Greeks talk about it, and Buddhism is about this too. So that was like what we were originally thinking about. And there's kind of community elements of it, but then a lot of it in Buddhism is like about meditation, right? And so and it comes back to the category thing. I was thinking about this because Buddhism is funny because they really like to categorize things up. It's like there's this 8-fold noble path and the 4 noble truths and the 3 characteristics and the 12 steps of dependent origination. But
that comes later, right?
Yeah.
That's not the Buddha. He wasn't saying that stuff.
No, the Buddha was, yeah. So in the Buddha, there's the 4 noble truths for sure, 3 characteristics for sure, and 8-fold noble path. And the thing about dependent origination is it's in the kind of version that is most commonly taught, it has these 12 steps, but in fact he talks about it with many different numbers of steps. So he's not too attached to the categories. And this is the thing that's really interesting about Buddhism, is that on the one hand, there, even for the Buddha, he always lays out these long lists and things like that. But then sometimes he gets called out on it. So people are like, previously you said there were 2 types of feeling, now you're saying there's 3, and one time you said there was like 18, and he's like, they're like, which one is it? And he's like, there, I think it's
like, that's not the point.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like, yeah, exactly. So I feel like the kind of answer he gives, this is partly me thinking it's funny in my head, but they ask him a question like, so are there like 2 types of feeling, or 3 types, or 18 types, or 36 types? And he's like, yes. And it's just like, that stuff doesn't matter. And I think there is something to that, which is like, categories are tools, right? Like making a dichotomy, or making a list, or making, one of these, like you were talking about, the political map or something like that. Like, they're ways of framing a question, but they're not the question itself. Like, they actually don't exhaust it, and they don't really, like, they can be like a handy tool, but like you have to like switch tools at different times.
It's like signposts.
Yeah. And just like, it's like the thing about, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail or whatever. And so if you're always making the same dichotomy, like, you're just going to like eventually hit something that you shouldn't have hit with that hammer. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's kind of one of the things that I'm working on now is, just about like skillful use of categories. Cause I'm absolutely not saying that we should avoid all use of categories, nor am I saying that, like, it's not a relativist position. Like, basically, I'm not saying that everything is just like equally true. The idea that if you don't believe in a single objective truth, then the only other alternative is like total relativism, is like itself a dichotomy that's created by this kind of thinking. You know what I mean? So like, there are lots of alternatives to that, and one of them is something that I'm very interested in right now. It's a branch of philosophy called pragmatism, which basically says that truth is less about abstract knowledge or categories or knowledge of universals or something like that, and more about like what actually works in the world. So it's much more action based. And I think, that's the kind of position that I'm kind of coming to, which is that if it works in the world, that's what's important. It's actually not important whether it adheres to this kind of like abstract preconception that we have of truth, maybe. And so it relates to this Buddhist thing, because like, you listen to some of the dependent origination stuff I was doing, which is like this complicated thing in Buddhism, but it's like almost like just different lenses of looking at the same situation, almost like different levels of abstraction. And it's not because every one of those is like exhaustive or you're going to like pin it down, but it actually just changes your way of viewing something. And so,
which can relieve suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And that's Buddhism is also kind of falls in this Greek early thing about the good life, because the whole point of it is to live a better life. Like, if it doesn't improve your life, like, why are you doing it? You know what I mean? And I think in modernity, but maybe just like in the West, in like over a long period, and the West itself is only an idea that's about like 100 years old. So this is like a new idea that there is something called the West. But like, whatever we're in now, if we don't categorize it, we have this tendency to like want to know like what's true and like nail it down into these like categories. Whereas like these older things are like, well, does that way of thinking like actually make your life better? And if it doesn't, like, why are you doing it? You know? And I think that kind of understanding of Buddhism, where he's like, look, all I care, he says over and over again, when they ask him these metaphysical questions, like, is there a soul? Like, is there not a soul? He's like, all I care about is suffering and the end of suffering. He's like, that's the only thing I teach. And he says that over and over again to all these kind of questions about like, you know, is there reincarnation and all these kind of things. Those things do come later. So anyway, that like, I guess, I'm really interested in Buddhism, and I'm getting more into it again. I kind of came to it 5 or 6 years ago through a psychiatrist who was like, maybe you should try meditating. And I tried meditating, and that helped me a lot. And then I took a few courses and read quite a few books on Buddhism at that time, but now I'm kind of like in a different phase of that exploration. But I was very curious about, yeah. What are you going to say?
I was going to say, I need to go to the shop.
Okay, do it.
And this is like so perfect for what I said at the start.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, you should define dependent origination. Well, I'm going.
Oh, God, yeah.
If you want to keep talking.
If I want to keep talking, I'll try and do it like as briefly as possible, which is like dependent origination is it's a way of understanding something that happens very fast and leads to suffering in our everyday lives. So it's it's lightning fast, it causes suffering, and the way the Buddha teaches it is like it's almost like detective work to see what's gone wrong in a given situation that leads us to suffer. So that may sound abstract, but in fact it's in the moment by moment interpretation, which is becoming popular only like right now in a few different writers. For example, Lee Brasington, with whom I did a meditation retreat like a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago, and he was teaching about his book. His book is available free online, and I think it's called Dependent Origination and Emptiness. And Delia is back, and I can answer any. So I basically just said I tried to explain what it is, which is, I'm trying to give it more appeal, which is like, it's something that happens really fast, and it causes suffering in our everyday life.
I feel like I have an example from today, which is what I said to you. When we met, you said, how did you get here? And I said, I want to tell this story.
Okay.
So, this morning, I went, there are rail strikes again today, which just feels like constant. Anyway, I went to get the train, and I was talking to someone else who I'd recorded an episode for this podcast with. And I knew he didn't want to post it for some reason, and so we had this call, and I did not expect that. Actually, what he said was he felt like he didn't reveal enough. He felt like he wasn't being fully vulnerable, and that actually he'd like to redo it, and he ended up revealing something really personal. And yeah, I just feel this kind of a broader thing that I feel so privileged, you know, that like with the Izzy episode, to share these personal stories, that people trust me with that.
Yes.
And that is a very, anyway, and that's kind of the whole point of this thing, because it's like, yeah, we all experience, like, it's so awful, these things that happen in people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's not, but it's like we all carry this pain. And we sometimes don't realize, and his was like, I didn't want to burden you with it, but it's like, it's like, I want to help you unburden yourself, you know, or something like. Anyway, so that was that conversation, and I was so involved in the conversation that then I just didn't get on the train.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh my God. And then there wasn't going to be one for ages because of the strikes.
Oh no.
And in that moment, but the same thing could happen, right? Say the train was cancelled, right? Because that was clearly just my fault. So fine. But say the train was cancelled, and then it's like, straight away you can say, oh, this is so shit, like, of course this happens to me, everything goes wrong, nothing works, why are there strikes, rah, 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 like
mental proliferation, where it like spins out, or it turned into, what ended up happening was, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go I'm gonna get on a bike, go here, get a coffee from this place that's, you know, go to whatever, get a bike to Victoria, get a coffee from this really place that has good coffee. So it's like, great, that's a win. Like, wow. And then it was like getting on the tube, ended up being way quicker, and then ended up coming to Highgate and went through the woods in Highgate, which I'd never been to. And I had been craving today, being in nature, and like the sun's out, and it was like
these events transpired. So I chose then, and it was when I stepped into the woods, it was just like, I just had this smile. I probably looked like a crazy person, but I was like, there's something just really healing about, I don't know, if anyone's struggling with anything right now, it's honestly, if you have nature accessible to you, it sounds like one of those bullshit things that's like, yeah, whatever, drink more water.
It's so important.
But it's like, I don't know what it is, but it's like, there's all this science around it, whatever, you can read that if that's your thing, but it's just like so healing. And in my head it was like, yes, the universe, this is where my belief thing or faith or something, so it's like, it is easier to believe. Why wouldn't I believe that the universe or God or whatever you want to say, some higher power, fate, whatever, has transpired to lead me to miss that train, to then end up here, so I have half an hour in nature unexpectedly, and so that's like the path of my life.
Yes.
And so, but then I was thinking, then that becomes like, it's like, oh, everything happens for a reason, blah blah blah, and then it's like, oh, well, how can you explain death or like being abused as a child, or like, and it's not, because it's not that. Because I think that's then where people have trouble with, because, you know, you can say that, fine, you missed a train and it was all meant to be. But when someone's in serious pain, it's like, how are you meant to say, oh, this was meant to be? But it's not like that. It's more like, and Brene Brown, I think, says it really well in this podcast. Do you know who she is? The vulnerability lady.
I haven't engaged. I think I started one of her books, but she has a podcast, or
and she has one of the top 5 TED Talks, I think, on how vulnerability is, like shame is, you need vulnerability for connection. Vulnerability is strength. This kind, but actually the scientific the research backing it up. So, but she says something, she's like this really smart woman who's very like, she's Texan, like very, not this like fluffy kind of spirituality stuff or whatever, but when she, I mean, you know, like some people, no, but it's like, so I feel like that's just me saying, I don't know, trying to.
The woo stuff. Or.
Yeah, as in, trying to just make people more comfortable who feel like, anyway, whatever. Some people just need data. So it's like,
yes.
She says, someone says to her, do you believe like in a greater power or the universe or fate or everything's meant to be, everything, whatever, happens for a reason? And she says, I use whatever helps me at the time, like whatever model helps me at the time. And I feel like that's what we're talking about the other night. It's like, if believing that the universe has my back, literally, that was a book I read that like led me to start thinking this way.
The universe has your back?
Yeah, The Universe Has Your Back by Gabby Bernstein. That I read that when I was in such a depths of depression, and it was like, and then a friend recommended it, and I was like, well, why wouldn't I believe someone? Because I just feel like so helpless and worthless, and there's no, but so okay, I'll read something that's telling me that actually someone's got my back. And then I found it a bit, that's why I'm like, oh, the spiritual, because that is more, and I got a bit freaked out. She's actually Jewish, but it's like talking about like doing prayers, and I was like, oh, this is a bit like, why am I reading a book about this? But that's why I'm saying Brene Brown is like not like that.
I see, yeah.
Because, you know, people need something that they relate to. If it freaks them out, like saying the word God like freaks some people out, right? So it makes me uncomfortable depending what the sense is.
Yes.
Anyway, but it's like, okay, me having this idea that actually I don't know the meaning, you can't find out. So like a breakup, all these breakups I've been through, it's like it's so painful, but it's like, if I can just believe I'm being supported, like I'm not alone, I'm being supported by something bigger than me. I don't know what it is, and I don't know the meaning, but if I can trust in that, that will help me get through that pain. So why wouldn't I do that?
Yes. And this is a view, I only learned this in the past few years, that this view is sometimes called religious pragmatism, which is basically saying, if it makes your life better to believe something, then you should just believe it, you know? And so it's a position that, so I have had similar moments like this, like both where I got into stuff that I thought was too woo, like Eckhart Tolle or Tolle or whatever.
I love him.
Yeah.
But yeah, that book was like, changed my life. But yeah, I'll be scared to say it because I'm like, oh, people will think
that it's a bit too woo or something like that. But at some point, a friend of mine who just someone I worked with, whom I really respected, like gave me that book, I think, Power of Now. And it did change things for me. Just like, I think I was living too much in the future and past, and the idea of like just focusing on the present is, I mean, in a way it's what the Buddhists are also recommending. That, so we started talking about dependent origination, and that's the understanding that if you're in this state of ignorance, it will lead to suffering. And the opposite of ignorance is what's called sati, or mindfulness. And so if you're in this state of mindfulness, suffering can't arise. And that's kind of that's like largely what the Power of Now is about anyway, right? Which is, if you're actually in the now and not allowing this mental proliferation, just like you did this morning, right? You missed the train, you're like, okay, well, now what can I do, given that getting on that train is now over, right? Then I can get a bike and get a coffee, and you stay in the present, right? And then, rather
than really, why did I beating yourself up? Like,
you could have lived in the past or the future, like, oh, now I'm going to be late, or, you know, or you're in the past of like, why didn't I get that train? But in fact, everything worked out perfectly. And yeah, so it is just being in that state of mindfulness. And then in fact, we're going to do this talk on William James, The Will to Believe, which is also this idea, it's about this question of like, is it possible to choose a belief? Because we seem to have this idea that beliefs are like convictions that come, it's almost like they're emotional or something, or like we don't have control over them, right? Like if someone asks about, you know, do you believe in God or something, it seems it's supposed to be not like something you choose to do or not, but he's like questioning that. And that questioning goes back to Pascal as well. There's not just the wager, where basically he's sort of 17th century French philosopher, and like he has this wager, which is like, you know, if you just play it like a game, right, that there could be a God or not be a God, and you choose to like live as if there is or as if there is not, then, and living as if there is makes your life better, then shouldn't you just do that? Because the punishment is so severe if you get it wrong, right? And there is a God and you didn't adhere to these principles. It's a weird like probabilistic like thing. And I think, I'm trying to think there's someone, maybe it's even T.S. Eliot, who basically says once you get into this category of like taking bets with God, you've already like lost the point of faith or whatever. But
yeah, I don't like that one, because that's about fear, and this whole school of thought.
Yeah, religious pragmatism.
Or it's more, because then I would say the contrary is true. So if you living like believing that something is supporting you and guiding you, whatever, makes your life better,
then you should
do it. But on the contrary, like for Ricky Gervais or like Alan de Botton or who's the other one who, like, famous atheists, Richard Dawkins or someone, if for them their life is better with thinking that God doesn't exist, it's like also they can go for it, like. But then wasn't there something about the data shows that
Yeah. So
you were telling me about another book.
Yeah, that was a book by Tanya Luhrmann. She's an anthropologist, and she studied a bunch of different sort of modern communities. So one was like modern witchcraft and magic and stuff like that. So people who actually do that. She got interested as an anthropologist about like, what do these people actually do? Like, what are their practices and stuff like that? And she got involved and ended up doing some of those practices. Apparently for magic, it's a lot of like visualization, like meditations. So basically it'll be like really intense, focusing on the image of a garden growing, and you just get better and better at these kind of visualizations. And what she says is it does change your life. Like basically it changes the way you
can make your garden grow quicker.
No, not like that, but just that as you get better at visualizing these things, you just become happier.
Visualizing what kind of things?
Like, so in her case, I think she was doing a visualization of a garden growing, and the only thing she was doing was spending like, let's say 30 minutes or an hour each day, like a meditation, right? Sitting there just trying to picture it more and more and more accurately. And that's like the first step, apparently. But apparently already just doing that like really changes your experience. So you come to appreciate like your senses a lot more, which kind of makes sense, right? And so what she's saying is that like they do these things, they say, you know, and they say there are these results. So like as an anthropologist, why wouldn't you like believe that what they say is true, right? Which is not that they're making claims about, you know, magic spells working or something like that, although they might also be making those claims. But if they claim just doing this practice makes you happier, like what is that practice and what does it do to your brain? And so that's kind of her attitude. She then went from that, I think that was maybe like 20 years ago, to about 10 years ago, she was looking at charismatic Christians in the States. So people who claimed to be in constant conversation with God. And she kind of got, so I read a book that she wrote about that. It's called When God Talks Back. And that was also a very eye-opening thing for me, because she was like, she opens the book with some kind of argument. In fact, we might even have the book here, in which case we could just read the opening. But like, basically she says, you know, if there were a pill that like made you live longer, made you less prone to depression, made you less prone to addiction, less prone to suicide, you know, improved your marriage, improved the quality of life and all this kind of stuff, would you take that pill? And everyone says yes. And she's like, that pill is religion, and most people won't take it.
That's how Matthew Walker's How to Sleep starts as well. Or Why We Sleep.
Why We Sleep.
And it's like sleep is the magic pill.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, that book has faced some criticism, I'm aware.
Why We Sleep.
Yeah, just about some of the data and things like that. I mean, I have a little bit of a reaction against it, because people are like, I've never been someone that can sleep a long time. Like I can sleep about 5 or 6 hours, and then I just can't sleep more. I can if I like miss a night of sleep or something, then I can sleep like 9, 10, 12 hours or whatever. But like people are always telling me like, oh, you're not sleeping enough. And like, I'm like, I haven't worked for 4 years. I don't set an alarm and I can't sleep. Like
You have worked. You just haven't worked.
What I mean is, yes. And I do get up early and I write, and I have worked very hard. I guess what I mean is I haven't had a job like where I needed to be somewhere at a certain time, and I still get up at like, you know, it varies on the day, but like 6, 7 a.m. and I start doing stuff, you know. And if I definitely do sometimes have too little sleep or whatever, but the whole idea of like, oh, you should always sleep 8 hours or something, that always annoyed me, because I can't sleep 8 hours. Like I can, but only if I'm really tired, you know what I mean? And that someone wrote a kind of critique of this book, which is like, there's a lot more variability in how much people need. And so the idea that, you know, most people are not getting enough is not necessarily true. It might be true for some people, but it's not like a universal prescription that always sleeping more is better or something like that.
I wrote about Why We Sleep in a newsletter. Mainly it's just like great confirmation bias of me being a night owl. Mm-hmm. And it's like, this is a chronotype, it's in your DNA.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
I just love that. But someone, when I was said I was going to talk about it, someone's like, you need to listen to this podcast that like rips it apart.
Oh, really? Okay,
but they started by criticizing him for being like a conventionally attractive white male, and I was like, yeah, I can't listen to people who start their critique of like, we shouldn't listen to this person based on their like the demographic they're from or something.
So Lerman's thing actually kind of changed my life too, because she thinks that there's this thing called the Telogen Absorption Scale, and it's basically like a psychological test for how easily do you become absorbed in an activity. It probably relates to the flow state stuff, but it's also like the questions are things like, if you hear noises, like, do you sometimes make it into music? Do you get sort of lost in thought? Like, do you know, and there's like a bunch of different things, but basically what's interesting about, so this is in How God Becomes, her more recent book is called How God Becomes Real, and that is also excellent. It's a much broader thing about what she's learned over the last 20 years. But the earlier one is called When God Talks Back, and I think it's 2012. And so she talks to all these people, and it looks like basically just prayer or constant attempts to speak to a God like produces differences in your experience, and which is pretty much what religious people have always said, that it makes your life better. But it feels like in our kind of modern culture, it's gotten very wrapped up in this question of belief, which I actually think is kind of a distraction. Like, why does it matter what we believe? You know, like it comes back to that, you know, pragmatism, you know, it comes back to this issue of like, if it makes your life better, you might as well believe it, right? And so like, what I get hung up on is, why do people care whether beliefs are true, quote unquote? Like, are beliefs even the thing that we should think of as true or false, or should we think of them more as like useful or not useful? And that kind of relates back to my pragmatism thing, which is like, if I believe, I should, you know, if I read the Matthew Walker book and I'm like, I should actually go to bed earlier, and then I go to bed earlier and it makes my life better, then great, like, job done, you know? Like, if I read the book and it stresses me out because I'm like, it's saying I need to sleep 8 hours and I can never seem to do that because I wake up naturally earlier and I feel fine, but there must be something wrong with me because I didn't sleep long enough, then not great. You know what I mean? Like, and which is kind of a claim that it doesn't really matter whether what he's saying is true or not. It's like, just like, you know, does it improve things for people, you know? And
that's what happened to this friend. I think it wasn't good for him because he became
too aware,
anxious about, and so that's not good.
Yes.
But whereas mine, that like had a positive impact on my life, because it's like, yay, now I can, you know, tell my dad or whoever implies that I'm lazy for not waking up at 6 a.m.
Right.
That it's like, there's this genetic thing. And it's like, it doesn't even matter if that's true. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
As in, because I'm not writing a paper on it. It's just like, this is my thing of, I don't know. And that's what I find with so many of these books. And I just wish people knew that, that's something that I want to do as well in the world, is like for education. It's like, not everything that's written is true. Obviously, it's like, we're all humans. Like, everything that's going on, these are systems that humans made. Like, you're a human as well. No human, like the person leading this country, they're a human. They're not perfect.
Yes.
And we need to, so that's where it's like critical thinking and, you know, the ability to figure stuff out on your own. And I don't know, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, and humility somehow. Just thinking sometimes we just don't know, maybe can't know. And that being okay in that position of uncertainty, you know, which I think is something that has to be kind of practiced and learned. The Lerman, How God Becomes Real is fantastic. I haven't finished it yet, but the basic thing is that she's saying, in the kind of modern West, we get really hung up on this belief thing. So we think, what religion is about is a set of beliefs, and if we can show that those beliefs are wrong, then those people are like stupid or wrong in some way. Where she's like, that's not what's going on in religion. Like, in religion, if you do this action, it makes your life better. So like, in a way, it doesn't matter what you believe. This is a point that Taleb makes in Anti-Fragile, which is basically, over the last 100 years, our explanation of why exercise is good for you has changed like 10 times. It's like, oh, it's because of cardiovascular health, or it's because of like micro tears in your muscles, which like makes them stronger, or it's like, you know, because God rewards hard work or something like that. And like none of those beliefs, like if those beliefs cause you to do exercise, then great. But like people have been motivated by like 10 different forms of explanation over just 100 years. And so that's to say nothing of the last 3,000, 5,000, 100,000 years, when it will have changed like unmeasurably over that amount of time.
Well, that's another thing that I realized about humans, staying with the like constantly building stuff. It's like constantly finding stuff out. It's like, because now for exercise, it's like, these are the hormones, and some of the stuff we're talking about, I'm like, look at the data, like, why is it good to go in nature? Blah, 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 this hormone in your brain. And it's like humans, we're obsessed with like, we need to understand every single little thing and like label stuff, like the whole of biology. It's like, this is called this. It's like, okay, a human came up with that recently.
Yes.
And we've discovered it, but it's like, it's kind of like missing the point. That's why I feel like, or going back to like Stoicism or Buddhism, it's like, these things, like, cool, you can go around labeling every single thing. That doesn't help. I mean, yeah, it helps people have better, like, obviously medicine helps like the quality of people's lives. It's not saying that, but it's like, there's no end, you know, it's like finding the atom, and it's like, this is the smallest possible thing, and it's like, oh no, there's stuff inside me now. But it's like kind of missing some point.
Yes.
Like some bigger thing than all of that.
Yeah, like bigger picture kind of thing. I mean, in defense of categories, I mean, like, of course, the dichotomy of control in Stoicism, you know, basically saying stuff you can control, stuff you can't control, that's a category, you know, and dependent origination is like this long process of like, okay, in order for there to be suffering, there's these 11 other things that had to happen. And so it is this like breaking everything down into categories, but at the same time, like, there's a question, it's like, those categories are not exhaustive, and they're not like, they're just there to like allow you to do something, right? It's not that they're fundamentally true in some way. I kind of feel like Western philosophy and theology and Christianity and science, which I think are all much more closely related than people commonly think that they are, was kind of about this process of searching for certainty and safety, and this understanding that if we just get nailed down all these like sort of categories, then that will like, then we'll be safe, which is the same thing as like wanting to build something to feel like we've then fixed a problem, you know what I mean? Which is that it's a very human desire. I'm all for, you know, feeling secure and feeling safe and feeling like we're making progress and stuff like that. Like, it's clearly a core important human thing, but sometimes it might be better to see it as that rather than seeing it as a kind of final destination after which all problems will go evaporate or whatever. Because, you know, if you look at any period of history more than like, you know, a lifetime, then you'll quickly see that there's constantly these attempts to solve problems finally. And it's not that it never happens. I mean, there are diseases that have been eradicated and things like that. Like, it occasionally happens, but in most cases, that's not the kind of problem, you know, problems are not subject to that, you know, solution that you never have to do anything again or whatever.
And then that comes back to the idea that we need problems because doing nothing. Oh my God, there was this book I saw, and I was thinking about when you were talking about this earlier. In an airport, I love airport bookshops so much because they really tell you what people care about. Yeah, and like what the masses care about. And there was this book, it was in the airport in Singapore, Changi Airport, and it was something like why we're happiest when we're striving. Something like that was like the tagline, and I can't remember what the book was called, but it's like, that's the thing, coming back to Unabomber, but like, I mean, but so it's like we need to be it's like the journey, not the destination, blah, blah, blah. But it's like you're happiest when you're, this is why we invent these things like golf and whatever. We can't, if there's nothing to do, that people say that they're like, I just want to earn loads of money so I can retire early. It's like, why do you want to do, like, what are you going to do
when you retire?
It's like, it's so, but it's like, try that.
Or if I just get this promotion, or if I just get this like next thing, there's a kind of built-in sense of like, then I can rest, or then I'll be happy, or
but like you need to do that stuff now, because that's never gonna, that's like being in the present. But it's also, I think it's like, try it, go do not, as I try strip everything away from your life. It's not fun. and it wouldn't be fun. It's like, it's like fear, like financial security, whatever. But even if you like go and talk to someone who has millions and does nothing, like they're not going to be a happy person, like fulfilled. I don't think happy is the right word. I think this is all like, we're talking about a fulfilled life, which
the good
people
life, flourishing,
thriving, the good life, people have
satisfaction,
because people have this problem with the self-help industry, that they're like, why, people are obsessed with improving yourself and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I think the people who think that probably don't have some of the issues that we have with like suffering. And it's like, okay, that's great. But it's like, some people like need some help figuring it out. Or it's even, a therapist said that, because I got really stuck in this, like, what's the point? Like, I need to know the point. Like, what's the meaning of everything? And she was like, there's no meaning. But she was like, no, there's no meaning. This is it. But she could see, like, I wasn't satisfied with that. And she's like, okay, if you're ruminating on this, like, you're really stuck in this like negative spiral of thoughts about like, what's the point? And now you feel like stuff's meaningless and then you can't get out of bed. You need to apply the problem solving lens. So go out and ask a question, sit down with a pen and paper. Here's the problem. What's the meaning? Now, how do I investigate this? And then that's a productive use of energy. And I think that's the thing when people criticize the self-help industry. My version of this is like, I'm struggling with this problem. So I'm reading all these books to try and say like, oh, what does this person think about this? Is that helping me? Like, oh yeah, that's so interesting, because now I've got all these ideas and let's have a conversation and we're figuring, this isn't, it's like, this is a productive use of, because it's like, we've met our needs of eating and stuff, but we're suffering.
Yes, we're still suffering.
So it's like,
I feel the way you do. I mean, I've had friends who are, I've had a few periods where I've gotten really into meditation, and then they're like, why are you doing this? And I'm like, it's about suffering. And then they're like, even when I tell them basic things like, in Buddhism, there's this understanding that suffering comes from desire. And so, and I like talk them through like the basic tenets of Buddhism. They're like, that means like nothing to me. And I'm like, you're probably not suffering then. Like, you probably don't need this, And so I don't think that it's like, oh, everyone needs to meditate. It's like, if you're already like living a life that you're pretty satisfied with, then you probably don't need self-help books or meditation or all these other like kinds of things that we get up to. And I think there's like a kind of there is a level of cynicism, which I sometimes share about the self-help stuff. Like, I should say that I totally read self-help books, and I have benefited from a lot of them. So I don't think that they're all just like nonsense, but I guess there is a kind of maybe cynicism that I hear from some of my friends about people profiting from what promises to be like some miracle cure where it never kind of is. Like, as in, it still requires you to work, and it, anything that's going to make a difference is like not going to be that easy. Whereas like, I think what they object to is like some of the marketing or the way that some self-help is presented. I don't know, but that's not really my view. It's more just something that I've heard.
Yeah, but anything worth doing, that comes back. It's like, there's no magic. Like, what do you want? All the problem. That's not. It's like choosing the problem. That's what he talks about in Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, like choosing the problems you want to have, because it's like, but this is my struggle with the self-help thing. Okay, so someone might genuinely believe, okay, part of it I think is cultural, like I relate self-help with like being American, for example.
Yeah.
So
I think that's another reason people
so
react
and
to
it's like marketing and stuff, the way stuff works in the US is different from a cultural perspective to how it is here and in other countries, and that's fine, it's like a different culture. But I think someone might genuinely, this thing might have changed their life. Like, you know, I can be like, oh my God, I was so depressed. Like me being like, I was really depressed searching, and then I listened to podcasts and heard people's stories, and this will really help you if you listen to stories. Like I could, but now I know life's more complicated and the solution's not going to be the same for everyone. But some people don't necessarily know that. Or like when I started therapy and I was like, everyone needs to do therapy. Therapy is the best thing. But now I know, no, therapy isn't the best thing for everyone. And, you know, it's more complicated. But so I think some of that is someone might genuinely think their book is going to save everyone's life. So
and maybe you need to have a belief like that in order to write it, because books take a really long time to write.
Yeah, so. Maybe. But then the other thing is with the category of self-help, what does that even mean? Like, is Marcus Aurelius meditations, like, is that self, you know, because it's like exactly. With there's so many crossovers.
Yeah.
It's
Are
like
the Buddhist suttas self-help? Is the New Testament self-help? Like,
yeah. It's like, is anyone saying, here's how you can, like...
Well, I will say the Gospels are pretty clear that they think they've got this new thing and it's a really good idea, you know. So there are moments in some of these texts where they really think they're onto something, and maybe they are, you know.
But yeah, I feel like it's another category that people, because I felt so uncomfortable. You know, people say stuff like, "Ugh, I'd never read a book like that," or it's some kind of shame thing. But it's like
contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah, but I feel it's the same with wellness. Like, people use it as a kind of derogatory, I don't know if that's the right word, like self-help, to kind of say like a superior, like I'm better than this. And it's the same with like, oh, wellness is harmful because it's anti-science or something like, and then yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I've struggled with that, like, of being like, oh my God, this is cringe that I've... But I feel like that's the same with me saying, oh, I met this person who worked for this political person. That so takes away from, no, that person really helped me and I think she's awesome. And it's the same with, like, Eckhart Tolle, like, that book changed my life. So it's like me being like, oh, Eckhart Tolle. It's like, that's not being true to myself, and also... You know, but it's scary. And then I think that's being like, well, no one will ever fully understand me. And it's like being okay with, we're all complex and I like what I like. I was telling you I had a Five Guys milkshake with bacon last night. I love that.
Now I kind of want to have one. I have been tempted. I've never been brave enough when I'm there to actually ask for the bacon.
They're so good. Okay, but that's not something I'm really ashamed of. I think I'm pretty cool for drinking that.
Pretty proud of that.
But you know what I mean.
Well, there will be vegans listening who object to.
Oh, I'm sure there's a vegan milkshake with, you know, I tried being vegan for 2 weeks and it was so unhealthy because I just found all these fast food vegan places and was just eating like a burger and a milkshake like a vegan version of.
Vegan burger, vegan milkshake.
Yeah. I feel like, okay, but I feel like there's so much more we can talk about. But have you said everything? Have we?
I think so.
Because I would love to have another conversation.
More about Buddhism. Because I was then going to talk about the thing of religion, how people, with the belief thing, how there are a lot of people, and this is what I found, because I wanted to tell you about my experience with Buddhism in India, in Ladakh, like kind of region where there's a lot of Tibetan, or I guess they're like second generation Tibetan now. But
anyway, but it's this idea that there are this stuff is not, you don't necessarily find it in the temples or in church. Like, go to church, how many of those people sitting there deeply believe that they're being guided or have had some spiritual experience? Like, maybe the proportion's the same as in the general population.
Right. But going somewhere is a practice, and they may have other practice. Not everyone who goes to a Buddhist temple or whatever actually does formal meditation or something like that. They're both practices. But I guess my kind of what has come to be my position is, like, if it causes you to do something and that thing helps you and makes your life better, then that's what matters. So, like, the practice of, if you go to church and going to church makes you feel better, then you should just go to church, right?
Yeah, because there are other benefits, like community, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you get a sense of belonging.
Well, and those maybe, I mean, I don't think there's a reason to make a claim about the whole issue is about God or something like it, just if you want to do it, like, now it sounds like the hippie thing of, like, if it feels good, just do it or something like that, which is like the opposite of what I think, right? You know what I mean? Like,
well, but then there's all the harmful stuff that comes out of religion. So then that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah. Shall we leave it there?
Yeah.
You look uncomfortable.
Yeah, my back's starting to hurt.